Hello everyone, welcome back to Historical Geology 1404. Today is our second to last lecture. It's not our second to last class section, because remember we are meeting again next Wednesday. Even though it's the middle of finals/graduation week, we still need to meet. Today we are going over the Mesozoic, aka the age of dinosaurs. I know a lot of people probably look forward to the dinosaur conversations. It is very fun. I do enjoy talking about dinosaurs. But before we get to that, are there any questions about anything that we have talked about thus far? You have goggles. Is it still going on? Oh my gosh, dude. Are you like the lone survivor at this point?
There's like 8 people left.
There's 8 people left? Shoot. Okay. Have you guys seen a movie called The Running Man?
Yeah.
That's what this makes me think of.
No, Glenn Powell, right?
Glenn Powell, yeah. Where he just has to keep going and not get shot. That's where you're at right now, my dude. You are Glenn Powell in it right now. All right. Yeah, any questions? Any interesting conversations, interesting topics? Do I have a fun fact? I have a news fact for you. Jason Isaacman, who is the administrator of NASA, has been doing all sorts of good stuff for NASA, right? He got the Artemis program not started, but he has been heading it very well recently since he was appointed last year. And yeah, a lot of progress has been made. A lot of funding has gone into it under his leadership. A lot of positive things. And this isn't a but, this is an and. Something he said the other day in an interview, I forget with who, suggested that they may be reconsidering, wait for it, whether or not Pluto is a planet. So, I mean, and to be fair, this is kind of how science goes, right? Where you make a determination based off the data you have, but as time goes on and more data is collected, you kind of have to, and this is essential to science, you have to continually analyze whether or not your original conclusion is still valid, right? Very important step there in the process. So if within a year or 10 they realize, hey, we want to call Pluto a planet again, everyone's going to go, you made us wait 20 years before admitting. And all the holdouts were like, no, Pluto's a planet. They'd be like, I told you so. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. That's science, though, for you. It may seem wiffle-waffly, but we go where the data points, right? All right. There's your interesting fact/news update. Okay. Any comments on that or anything else before we push forward? I did not get a new snake. No. I got a new terrarium that can house one. It's either going to go, so one of my coworkers upstairs over the weekend, he caught a beautiful emerald green tree snake. And said that he was going to do a photo shoot with it, and then he might give it to me to house in here so we could use it for education. So I got a terrarium there that I could keep it in. Ideally, I would have a taller one like what I have for my frogs, but no one was selling one, and they're very expensive. So he's going to live in here for a while until I can get my hands on a better case for him. But he'll probably go over there on that table where those samples are right now, and I'll move those somewhere else. So that's a possibility. There's also the possibility that my friend could give me a newly hatched sulcata tortoise. We'll have to see. Depends. It's hard to tell if they've laid eggs or not because they burrow underground. They're about 3 feet underground where their nest usually is. So it's very hard for them to tell whether or not they've ever laid any eggs. They have found 2 eggs that have gotten kind of broken and pushed up out. As the turtles are kind of like coming in and out of their nest, occasionally they'll accidentally kick one up out of the nest. They found 2. So they believe that they've laid more eggs, but they can't really tell how old those eggs are or how long they've been dead. So it's possible. There may be, if he goes out there one of these days and finds some newly hatched turtles crawling around his backyard, he's going to give me one. And those are sulcatas, West African spurred tortoises, they're called. They're the third largest species of turtle in the world, tortoise in the world. Okay, they get about that long, stand about that high off the ground, just slightly smaller than Galapagos tortoises, and they live to be about 150. So if I ever do get one of those, my grandchildren will end up raising it. Or not raising it, but end up keeping it, presumably, assuming that they actually bother. Okay, so yeah, that's what that's for. It'll probably be over there in a week or so. Okay. All right, so the Mesozoic. We just left the Permian, and what happened at the end of the Permian? An extinction. Not just an extinction, the extinction. The worst extinction. Okay? When I say extinction, you guys immediately think dinosaurs. Everyone thinks about the dinosaurs. Why? Because dinosaurs have captured our imagination and we love dinosaurs. I'm going to talk about dinosaurs plenty today. But the extinction that killed the dinosaurs was not the worst nor the largest extinction. The Permian was. So what do we lose at the end of the Permian? Of all life that was on Earth, only 5% of everything that was in the ocean and about 30% of everything on land survived that Permian extinction. Why do you suppose it hit the oceans the hardest?
Didn't it raise the ocean temperature and animals can't adapt quick enough to even 2 degrees?
Yeah. Ocean temperatures and ocean chemistry, right? If I changed the atmospheric content of what we breathe, what would happen to us? We would die. We would fall unconscious, right? You increase the amount of argon in the atmosphere you breathe, you're not bringing enough oxygen into your bloodstream, you fall unconscious, and eventually, yes, you will die. Well, the same thing goes for fish and everything else in the water, okay? You change the chemistry of the ocean a little bit, or the temperature of the ocean a little bit, stuff starts dissolving. Creatures suffocate. Their food sources die. It all has to do with the food chain. You kill off a species of plankton, you kill off the species of tiny little fish that eat that, which are eaten by another larger fish, which are eaten by sharks, so on and so forth. It goes up and down the food chain. Okay? So, we lost a whole bunch of stuff as a consequence of this, all right? We lost our rugose corals, those horn corals. They are gone. We lost our tabulate corals, which formed the core of a lot of our reefs for a very long time. We lost the lacy bryozoans. We still have some bryozoans out there, but the ones that kind of had these kind of beautiful lacy fan shapes, like what we've seen in some of our fossils in our labs, those are now gone. And the trilobites. Trilobites finally kicked the bucket after having been here since the Cambrian. Okay? So they are gone. Bummer. They held out so long. Now, what happens after an extinction? Animals fill in the niches. What do we call this? Huh?
Whenever the animal or become the main.
So both of you are correct, but there's a word for it. When you have an extinction and a whole bunch of niches are left vacant, and other things go to fill in those niches, what do we call that? Evolutionary what? Radiation. Yes. They are radiating. Okay? That's not bombarding the area with, isotopic byproducts. No. It is a few things that survive, expand outward, fill all those niches, and diversify greatly to fill in the spaces left behind. Okay? That is an evolutionary radiation. By the way, look who stuck around. Stromatolites. I'm still standing, right? And yes, they are still today. They have survived all the extinctions since then as well. All right, so moving into the Triassic. This is the first of the Mesozoic periods. Okay? The Triassic went from 252 to 201 million years ago. I'll write that down real quick. The Triassic was generally cool, But it did have some warm cycles, not nearly as hot as we will see it getting into here in the near future. Generally cool, coming out of this, slowly warming up, slowly increasing our warming trends. Now, coming out of the Permian, right here, okay, so this is the extinction right there. We see massive spikes in the number of species, okay? Lots of diversification here within only a couple million years, okay? Now, this is representative of a group called conodonts, but we're kind of treating this as a general, like a facsimile for the rest of life as well, okay? This is just a convenient graph I happen to have on hand for conodonts, okay? But what else do we see here? There's a few other drop-offs. What may be causing those? It's those kind of fluctuations in temperature. Even though the organisms survived the extinction, there's still very few of them, relatively speaking. Okay? So any shift, any change is going to be a threat to a population that is still trying to recover, right? A catastrophe that normally might only kill 10% of your population, sure, but what if 90% of your population just died in a bigger catastrophe? That smaller one rolls along. 10% of 100 is significantly more devastating to the population than 10% of a million, right? And so we see these heavy impacts from things like relatively minor climate shifts of hot and cold for a little while, and it does end up stabilizing, okay? All right, reefs. No more rugose corals, no more tabulate corals. We do have some sponges, but here in the Triassic, we see a new type of coral take the stage, hexacorals. Hexacorals are the ancestors of modern-day corals like what we've got today. They are not the same thing, just ancestors of those. You can actually find hexacoral samples in pretty much every fossil or rock shop anywhere in the country. They were, or in the world really, they were extremely widespread and extremely successful, okay? And they made the reef systems starting here in the Triassic. Here on out, all reef systems are going to be coral dominated with one exception that we will see later on today in the Cretaceous, okay? We also see sea urchins change quite a bit to become more like the ones we have today. These are pictures of horn corals right here, or not horn corals, excuse me, hexacorals. So again, these are very common. You go any rock shop anywhere, you see those, you think hexacoral, you remember Mr. Hart taught you that. All right, cephalopods. This was a very good time for cephalopods, specifically ammonoids. Ammonoids became extremely successful and huge during this time. I have seen ammonoid fossils the size of dinner tables, okay? Actually, I did see one that got sliced in half and polished and used as a dinner table to fit 8 people. Yes, I would love that one of these days. If I ever get my hands on $2 million, I'll make it happen, okay? Okay, now, why do we like looking at these cephalopods so much during this time? I mentioned to you in a previous lecture that ammonoids work as great index fossils. They have to this point, and they still continue to be great index fossils. They radiate, they expand throughout the oceans very, very well. Tiny ammonoids, massive ammonoids. Curly ammonoids, the sutury, super sutury ammonoids. Nautiloids, by the way, still around. They never become as successful as ammonoids again until ammonoids go extinct with the dinosaurs. Okay, so for the whole Mesozoic, ammonoids are still in the lead there. There's a variation of ammonoids that I've told you about before called belemnoids. Belemnoids, think squid, but they are a cephalopod, okay, just like our ammonoids and just like our nautiloids, but they have straight bodies instead of curled bodies. And instead of having hard parts on the outside, stick with me, camera, instead of having hard parts on the outside, they have hard parts on the inside, okay? Right here. These are pieces of belemnoid, okay? These spikes, internal hard parts like you see I've got there. Why would a creature like a squid want to have this hard spike, which by the way is made out of aragonite, okay, why would it want that inside its body? What purpose could it serve? What? Structure, so like body structure? Perhaps part of it,
Protection.
but it's on the inside. This was inside of the creature.
It would eat their victims whole or alive.
I mean, that doesn't really explain what that does, though, does it?
Like in case of anything tries to like eat it, kind of like, you know how like whenever some bugs are bitten or like have like a bitter taste, like to frogs, so they make it.
Yeah.
bitter for the bugs to eat.
That's a very interesting thought. Some species of bugs do have a very bitter taste, so that if they are eaten, they'll get spat out. Here's the thing, though. That bitter taste comes from something that they secrete on the exterior of their shell. Frogs, they swallow that thing, they spit it out. The bug is still alive. If something protective is inside of a body, then the body must be pierced before that thing has any effect, right? Wouldn't do me a whole lot of good. If I was a poisonous human, you'd have to bite me before you got poisoned. That's not very effective. There are some organisms like that, particularly plants. Okay, a lot of plants are poisonous, and that's to deter the species from being a target, not necessarily the individual.
Would they shoot them?
No, these remained inside of their bodies, right there in the core.
So is it because if they're to get eaten? No.
Nope. Nope. This actually doesn't have anything to do with self-preservation. Those are all good thoughts, though. Okay, those are all absolutely, those are all thoughts. Those are all things that exist in nature, just not with this particular organism. This is ballast. Do you guys know what ballast is?
Is it kind of like a gallbladder?
Huh?
The gallbladder? Like something that's not.
Not the gallbladder. You're thinking about swim bladders in fish?
I've never.
No? Okay. Animals that live in the ocean, they swim. They float, right? Why do they float? It's a difference in density, right? We've talked about this. Buoyancy, right? For an animal to float, it must be buoyant, but they don't always want to float up high. Sometimes they want to go down low. In the case of a fish, all they got to do is start swimming down, right? Squid can do that too. But something that happened later on in the evolutionary tree is fish developed these things called swim bladders. Have you ever gone to the store and you've seen those pills of things called cod liver oil? No? Yeah. That's actual oil from actual fish in something called a swim bladder, because oil floats on water. Fish eventually evolved, we'll talk about that later, the ability to have these special organs filled with that oil that help them to float. Now, belemnoids didn't have that, but they did have gas. Okay? They would fill their bodies with gas produced from the stuff they ate if they wanted to float higher in the water column. But you need some way to sink back down if you don't want to be that high. So what's the answer? You grow a weight in your body that causes you, when you release the gas from your body, to sink down. You want to come back up, produce a little more gas. Go up there. Sink down, release the gas, go back down. This is the exact same process we use in submarines. Submarines have a lot of weight to them. They want to rise, they want to fall. You increase or decrease the amount of gas that you release. Okay? Yeah. Interesting, huh? Okay, so ballast. Fish. Okay, here we go. This is the slide I was just talking about with fish. Okay, fish develop a swim bladder during the Triassic. So that's that oil, okay, that gives them that buoyancy that they need. It's full of omega-3s, okay, amino acids that you really need to help maintain your body, okay. Ray-finned fish, which remember are the majority of fish that we have on the world today, they start getting more of the characteristics that you and I would associate with a modern fish, okay. So things like the scales, modern-day scales, like what we have now. The teeth that we would see them have now, kind of peg-like. If you've ever looked at fish teeth, most of them are not sharp or jagged. They're kind of peg-like. Why? Because most fish will just eat smaller prey, or they'll eat crustaceans, or they'll eat algae, or they'll eat any of that stuff that doesn't necessarily require piercing. And then the species of shark that will be the ancestors to what we see today come out of the Triassic as well. Okay? We can tie a direct line between today's sharks and the sharks we see in the Triassic. Okay, now that's the fish and that's the ammonoids, but let's talk about what everyone's thinking about. The reptiles. What are the reptiles doing during the Triassic? Well, we got to start off with the ones that swim. Yes, they're swimming reptiles. Reptiles, interestingly enough, isn't it funny? Reptiles came from amphibians. Amphibians came from fish. So life, to this point, vertebrate life on land has gone fish to amphibians, leave the water, become reptiles, thrive on land, absolutely dominate the landscape during the Permian. And then during the Triassic, what do we see? We see reptiles go back to the water. Okay? So that's what happens. We see swimming reptiles. Now, when you guys look at these, and when most of the world looks at these, you think dinosaurs. This is where I got to break some hearts. Dinosaurs did not, or here, dinosaurs probably could swim, or at least most of them. Let me rephrase that. Swimming reptiles were not dinosaurs. These are not dinosaurs. Also, by the way, dinosaurs did not fly, at least not the pterosaurs. Those were not dinosaurs, okay? Flying reptiles are not dinosaurs, neither are swimming ones. I'll talk about what defines a dinosaur here in a little bit. But early on, we had a couple of different types of swimming reptiles show up, occupying these different niches. Placoodonts, okay? These guys, they kind of look like, almost like iguanas, okay? Then we have nothosaurs. These kind of fill the same niche that seals do today, okay? Very sleek bodies, but would go and live and sleep, raise their young on land, okay? Plesiosaurs, like this, long-necked predators. You've probably seen lots of art of plesiosaurs, like Elasmosaurus and such, okay? These were fully aquatic, but still air-breathing right there, still reptiles. And then ichthyosaurs, which fill the same niche that dolphins do today. And you can even see some of the same characteristics that dolphins do, right? We call that convergent evolution. You remember we learned about that in Module 2, right? Convergent evolution, where things that occupy the same niche, evolution favors the characteristics that give them the advantages in those niches. So even though ichthyosaurs and dolphins are separated by hundreds of millions of years, they have some of the same traits or similar traits because evolution favors those traits in the same situations. Okay? So, by the way, interesting thing with ichthyosaurs. They are reptiles. But it would seem they gave birth to live young. They gave birth to live young. Interesting. But the reptiles. That doesn't make sense. How do we know this, by the way? Because there's actually a fossil of a mother ichthyosaur giving birth to one. That is poor mama dead mid-childbirth and then fossilized with both mama and baby together. That's what that is right there. Sad, but fascinating. Do you guys know that there are actually some species of reptiles today that give birth to live young? They don't lay eggs. We have one. Not here permanently. Frank Portillo upstairs, he has one. Rosy boas will give birth to live young. They don't lay eggs. And on the other side of the equation, aren't there some mammals that lay eggs? Platypus, yeah. You know what we call those? Monotremes. Monotreme mammals lay eggs. Platypi and echidnas. Okay? So, the things people take for granted as universal rules, not always. Evolution sometimes favors the alternative. Okay? Now, why would it be evolutionarily advantageous for these animals to give birth to live young? It's not because they're reptiles. What's the second thing you just said? They don't have to go on land. Why would it be difficult for this thing to go on land and lay its eggs? Yeah, and that tail, right? Oh, plesiosaurs like this still clearly have a body capable of pushing itself up onto land. Not these. When was the last time you saw a dolphin beach itself, go up to give birth, and then go back out to sea? Doesn't happen, right? So, just like dolphins do today, eventually it became advantageous, evolutionarily advantageous, for them to be able to have the mutations to give birth to live young out in the ocean instead of laying eggs on land. Okay. And then turtles. We see turtles show up during the Triassic. Okay. Plants. What are the plants doing? Trees have come a long way. Plants were not as devastated by the extinction of the Permian as the animals were. So they spread out pretty quick. They maintained a lot of their niches. We see a whole bunch of different types of ferns fill in. Remember, we still don't have grass. We don't have grass yet. Anywhere today that you would see grass, imagine it being filled with ferns. Okay? That's the Mesozoic for most of the time. Okay? And then our cycads, conifers, and ginkgos make the majority of our larger plant material as well. And those are the food base for most of the dinosaurs that are showing up. Okay? Most of the herbivorous dinosaurs, I should say. All right, now let's talk about our terrestrial animals. What we talked about in the Permian, we got these pelycosaurs. Remember the ones with the strong jaws, the teeth that and the meant for slicing and ripping, the more vertical leg placement, right? And the sails on their back, some of them, like Dimetrodon and Elasmosaurus. Okay. Then after that, we got therapsids. What made therapsids special? Specialized teeth meant for multifunction purposes, ripping, tearing, snipping, grinding, right? Potentially, they were warm-blooded as well. There's no indicator that they needed to go warm themselves in the morning in the sun, at least not too much. And then also, even more vertical leg placement. So we've gone from amphibians with their legs out here to pelycosaurs with the legs right here to therapsids with the legs right here. Okay? Now the therapsids, just like everything else, got slammed by this extinction. Some of them survived though. In particular, there was one that was extremely successful. Lystrosaurus, right here. Don't be fooled. These are not full-size trees. This isn't a mega vampire pig. One of my students was like, that looks like a vampire pig at one point because it has the giant teeth here. That wasn't used for killing or tearing or anything. These were herbivores. These things were about the size of a small dog. Okay? They're about that big. These are just little tree seedlings that they're eating right now. Okay? Lystrosaurs were about that big, cute, waddling around, right? And they were extremely successful. One of the only therapsids to survive the Permian extinction. We have fossils of Lystrosaurs everywhere. I want you to imagine herds of these things all over Pangaea, post-extinction. We have more fossils of these than almost any other land organism in a singular species anyway, across the continents that were combined in Pangaea. These things were everywhere. One of the reasons, this is one of the fossil reasons why we are so certain in things like supercontinents, because those fossils were present on every continent during this time. Now, therapsids, like Lystrosaurus that survived the Permian, become the ancestors to our mammals, okay? Our ancestors, okay? So the mammals that come later come out of these therapsids. Now, mammals and dinosaurs evolved during the Triassic, okay? Post-Permian extinction, with all the pelycosaurs and the big therapsids dead, big amphibians dead, really only the smaller things survived, the things that required less food, pretty common in extinction. The stuff that eats the most food is the one that suffers the most, right? Because large bodies require constant nourishment. You have to constantly eat. You go a few days without eating, your body dies. Smaller animals require less constant nourishment typically. They can deal with smaller nutrition sizes. So small reptiles that would become dinosaurs and small therapsids that would become mammals developed within a few million years of each other. But dinosaurs came first. Those early small dinosaurs started to diversify and fill niches. Mammals started to do the same thing. We see direct competition between ancestral dinosaurs and ancestral mammals for a while in the Triassic. They were almost neck to neck. With a few different evolutionary changes, or just a million years less separation, the Mesozoic may have been the age of the mammals. And the dinosaurs would have taken that back seat. But as it happens, dinosaurs won that particular fight. They diversified faster, filled more niches, left less living space for the mammals. Mammals, therefore, had to go more or less into survival mode, which meant stay small, stay hidden. Mammals, from here on all the way through the end of the Cretaceous, stay small, rodent-like, usually nocturnal, which means living at night, insectivores, herbivores, scavengers, not very many direct carnivorous hunters. They would mostly just do what it took to survive the dinosaurs. And they stick around, lucky for us that they do. So, dinosaurs are a continuance of the evolution of those pelycosaurs, okay? So they have the very strong jaws. They have specialized teeth. You have some that are meant for grinding and snipping, some that are meant for crushing, slicing, okay? And that vertical leg placement. What does vertical leg placement give an advantage for? You and I have vertical leg placement. What does that mean? My leg bones are joined to my hip here with sockets directly underneath of my body. What if I was a little bit offset, so my legs were out here? How efficient would it be for me to run? It would not be efficient at all, especially not on two legs, which is why you'll see the non-vertical leg placement organisms can't move very fast. Think crocodiles, right? Even though they're reptiles, they don't have that vertical leg placement. Their limbs are out here. Can they go very fast? No, not anymore. There were some crocodilians with vertical leg placement early on that could go very fast. That's actually what this point is, okay? Crocodiles are developing from the same archosaur ancestors as dinosaurs, okay? Archosaurs are that group of ancient reptiles that crocodiles and dinosaurs both come from, okay? Then they diverge from that point. That common ancestor, the Archosaurians, diverge into dinosaurs and crocodiles, and they are directly in competition with each other. For a while, crocodiles start getting the larger body size faster, but the pace at which Dinosauria was able to evolve and change was astonishing. In the fossil record, it's just like boom, 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 almost exponential increase in how rapid dinosaurs were able to evolve and change and to fit into new environments. And sure, while crocodiles may wipe out one particular group because they dominate a niche here, dinosaurs in general were able to succeed overall, okay? And so, again, just like the mammals did, the crocodiles took that back seat. They didn't quite get as passive as mammals got, though. Crocodiles did not just stay to the shadows and stay small. Believe me, we will talk about some of the crazy mega crocodiles that have existed. All right, so here is our breakdown. Where is my crate that I had here? Oh, it's down here. Okay, here's our breakdown of dinosaurs and how we tell them apart from each other, okay? Dinosauria starts right here, okay, and deviates from there into two groups, what we call Ornithschia and Saurischia. Ornithschia means bird-hipped. Saurischia means lizard-hipped. Do you see the problem? Can anyone identify the problem with this classification? Bird-hipped, lizard-hipped. What is that? It's a bird. Aves right here. For those of you that don't know, birds, modern-day birds, are the descendants of avian dinosaurs. So it's not actually quite true to say that the dinosaurs went extinct. They didn't. One group survived, the avian dinosaurs, which then went on to evolve to become our birds today. So technically, birds are, in a certain classification sense, dinosaurs. All right? Or at least dinosaurian descendants. Now, which group of dinosaurs are they in, though? They are in the lizard-hipped dinosaurs, not the bird-hipped dinosaurs. How did that happen? Clerical error, maybe? Unfortunately not. Okay, take a look at this. This is a Saurischian. Oh, come on now. Okay. When you're looking at this, people initially, when they found these bones, I 3D printed these, by the way. When people initially found these bones, they thought to themselves, okay, that kind of looks like a bird. Okay, they thought, that kind of looks like a bird. There are definitely some characteristics they have in common, right? Right, you can see the bones, especially those ones down at the bottom, look very common, look very similar to each other. So they're like, that kind of looks like a bird. So they named it bird-hipped dinosaurs. But then later on, they found this other group of dinosaurs. And they were like, those are lizard-hipped dinosaurs. And then upon closer inspection, they realized that the lizard-hipped dinosaurs look more like birds, bird hips. But by then, too many years had passed. And the naming system stuck. So to this day, we still call birds or dinosaurs with this type of hip, we call them lizard-hipped dinosaurs, including birds. And the ones over here that have bird-hipped bones do not include birds. It's a whole mess. Okay? But that's Ornithischian and Saurischian. Okay? Those are the broadest two ways that we will separate dinosaurs. Now, our Saurischians, that includes things like the famous T-Rex, right? Our birds are in there as well. Also, the sauropods. So the big, long-necked, plant-eating dinosaurs. Okay? What's in Ornithischia? Stegosaurus. Everyone knows Stegosaurus. Triceratops, right? Parasaurolophus and other hadrosaurs, right? The ones with the big banana-shaped ornament on their heads. Okay? Now, I told you already about swimming reptiles, how they are not dinosaurs. Neither are flying reptiles. Okay? These come from a different group. Swimming reptiles, flying reptiles, and dinosaurs all branch off from the common ancestor, which was not a dinosaur at the time that they branched off from each other. Therefore, the swimming and flying ones, not dinosaurs. Okay? These flying reptiles had hollow bones. That's the only way that they could physically fly. Do you guys remember last term when I went on that big tangent about how impossible it is for dragons to exist? Yeah? What was my main reasoning there? The size of the wingspan you would need, right? For a body the size of the dragons they show us in Game of Thrones, you need a wing that would go out like half a mile that way, and a wing that would go out like half a mile that way, right? To push that much meat and bone off the ground. Nature figured out a way around that, kind of. Hollow bones. That's why birds die really easily. They slam into a window, they fall to the ground. That's pretty much it most of the time. Hollow bones. They break, they get diseases, fall apart, but they allow them to fly. Saves a lot of weight. Okay? Pterosaurs had the exact same adaptation. Hollow bones. And believe me, these things are a pain to try and take out of a rock. Like 1 second, you're just like, with your little micro pneumatic drill, right? Just blasting little pieces of sand. I'm literally removing grains of sand from around this bone, 1 grain of sand at a time. And then before you know it, and half your bone goes pew off that direction because the 1 grain of sand was connected to it stronger than the rest. And it's like, I just spent 4 hours trying to remove this bone. A lot of time in a lab. It can get frustrating. Okay. So, pterosaurs, they show up in the Triassic. All right. Now, at the end of the Triassic, yes, we have another extinction, believe it or not. Now, the therapsids that had been holding on to this point are pretty much die off here on out. Okay? This was the end of their competition with the dinosaurs. The Triassic is known as the first age of the dinosaurs because this is when they showed up. But they didn't become truly 100% dominant over so many ecosystems until the end of the Triassic, and their major competitors couldn't keep up with them and the rate at which they were able to adapt following this extinction. Okay? So our big amphibians, our big archosaurs, our big therapsids, any mammals that were still holding out there, they couldn't keep up. And the dinosaurs, only 100,000 years after this extinction, had already spread to fill the niches left behind. Okay? Okay. The tectonics during the Triassic, we have Pangaea. Okay? Australia, Antarctica, India, Africa, South America, North America, Europe, Northern Europe, and Russia, China, South China. Here's Tibet, Iran, and Turkey. What will be Tibet, Iran, and Turkey are currently the bottom of the ocean here in the Tethys Sea. Okay? And remember what I told you last time, the Tethys Sea is basically, it's essentially Gulf of Mexico times 10, right? This massive inland seaway that is surrounded almost on all sides by land. Protects it from a lot of the storms that go on out here, although it's large enough to have its own storms, right? But a lot of the other activity can't quite make it in there. And so this ends up being this, it's kind of a haven, okay? An amazing, life-rich ocean in between all these coastlines. Because think about all the sediment and biological material that is flowing off of all of these land masses into here, filling it with all the organic stuff it needs for life to thrive. Okay? Now, because we had so much land mass, there's a lot of fluctuations, extremes in our climate. Okay? So everywhere you see here that is this yellowish color is a desert during this time. That's all desert. Remember when we talked about what makes a desert? Having a lot of land mass together and therefore cutting a lot of land off from sources of evaporation makes a desert. It's a lot of desert. So we have desert areas, and then we have densely forested areas around the equator, and then lots of coniferous forests around here, except when there's periods of cooling. And then we do, in fact, have ice caps up there. All right, moving into the Jurassic. That is 201 to 145 million years ago. Reefs have gotten extremely big. Hexacorals, responsible for that. Okay. They are filling up the Tethys Seaway. Massive coral reefs, in particular around the equatorial regions of the Tethys. Why wouldn't there be reefs out in the other ocean? The bigger ocean outside of Pangaea? Not necessarily because of the storms. What do reefs need? I mean, sure, they need other life, but there's life out there in those deeper, bigger ocean too. Like the planktons they eat. What else do they need? Not necessarily any sediment either. How? Huh? The sun. They're photosynthetic. Yeah, they're made out of photosynthetic organisms at the core of these reef systems. Okay? So they need photosynthesis, or they need access to eat the photosynthesis stuff, which means you need relatively shallow water so that you can live in the photic zone. So the deeper ocean outside of Pangaea, not ideal for coral systems, which is why most of them show up in the Tethys. Okay? Except for the occasional islands that would pop up out there, there would be reef systems around those islands for sure. Okay. Planktons really taken off. The Jurassic and the Cretaceous would kind of be like if you took a mouthful of seawater, you'd basically be eating soup, right? Filled with those tiny little animals, okay, those planktons. There's a particular type of plankton called dinoflagellates that we see show up here. We still have them in the oceans today. Belemnoids do very well in the Jurassic. All of those little the spikes, the aragonite spikes I showed you, these are different, bless you, these are different variations of those aragonite spikes that we see throughout the Jurassic. Wide, so many different varieties of belemnoid spikes here. All right, for our swimming reptiles, our ichthyosaurs and our plesiosaurs are really the only dominant groups here. Crocodilians, which evolved on land and started off as kind of, like I said, they were competing with dinosaurs, carnivorous dinosaurs, but how are they able to compete? Don't think about crocodilians the same way that you think of crocodiles and alligators right now. They were walking upright on 4 legs. They were able to run really fast. Imagine being chased by a dog crocodile, right? That would be crocodilians during the Triassic. During the Jurassic, though, having lost that competition with the dinosaurs, they moved to being aquatic, okay? They become water predators. Not fully. They're not breathing water, clearly, like the crocodilians today don't either. But they are spending most or all of their time in the water, depending on the ecosystem, okay? So we see the saltwater crocodilians and the freshwater crocodilians like what we have today. And then our plants, they're still doing very well. All of those same forests, all those same everything. Lots of diversification in the gymnosperms. Excuse me. And gymnosperms become more exclusive. I told you about how some gymnosperms today, like pine trees, will actually put acids in the soils to prevent anything else from growing in them, right? That's what's going on here. Specialization to isolate populations, essentially, is what's going on. All right. Now, our dinosaurs. The largest land animals to ever exist are during the Jurassic, okay? The sauropods, the largest sauropods, the titanosaurs we call them, 120 feet long, 60 to 80 feet tall, 80 tons of meat, okay? Really, really, really big animals, okay? Next week when we watch Jurassic Park, you'll get to see a Brachiosaurus, right? Brachiosaurus. Probably brachiosaurids were the tallest animals to ever live. Some of them could get up to 70 to 80 feet tall, I want to say. But titanosaurs were the largest, okay, overall. Longest, heaviest. Have you guys seen the new Jurassic World movie, Rebirth? Any of you guys see that? Yeah? You know what I'm talking about then. Those were titanosaurs in that movie, okay? Huge. Yeah, they're pretty cool, pretty cool. All right, now we see a lot of other diversification in dinosaurs as well. They don't just get big. We don't just get the biggest dinosaurs. We get spiky dinosaurs, armored dinosaurs, frills. We get all of these things. The variety of mechanisms for both defense and attack we see in dinosaurs is impressive, okay? And that trend continues into the Cretaceous later on, even though we don't see the same degree of body size move into the Cretaceous. Why would large body size be a positive evolutionary advantage? Huh? There's so much food? Well, it takes a lot of food to sustain that body, but that's more of a downside. You have to keep eating. These things would eat literally all day long to maintain their energy they need to support a body that big. They didn't even have time to chew, by the way, guys. Not that they could. They didn't have mechanisms for chewing in their mouth. But, I mean, if it was necessary, they might have evolved it. But they didn't have time. They would eat, swallow, eat, swallow. The chewing would happen in their stomach later. These bigger dinosaurs, like titanosaurs, they would swallow rocks. The rocks would hang out in their stomachs, and as they're walking around looking for more food to eat, it would jostle the rocks in their stomachs, which would grind up the food that they swallowed, that plant matter. And then they would digest it that way. The rocks were chewing their food for them. Okay? Why then would it be an advantage to be big? It's more difficult to kill an individual, right? If I am a 30-foot-long Allosaurus, I'm going to have a heck of a time trying to kill a 120-foot-long Titanosaur, right? Yeah, it's a survivability trait. What's the trade-off here? Sure, each individual costs more food. What does that mean for your food system? It's a bigger drain on it, which means you can only have so many animals. This is true in the Serengeti of Africa today. You look at a herd of elephants, there might be a dozen or maybe 24 elephants in a herd of elephants. But there are hundreds of gazelle in each herd, hundreds of wildebeest. The more food each individual takes, the more food your population as a whole takes, the less individuals can be sustained. So, fewer larger animals, more smaller ones. Our mammals are pretty much maintaining the same place here, staying small. They live in the ground. They come out at night. Frogs show up on the fossil record during the Jurassic. Okay? We had frog-like amphibians. I compared amphibians in the past to frogs, but modern-day frogs, the earliest fossils we have for those, the earliest positively identified fossils we have of those, are from the Jurassic. What else do we see show up in the Jurassic? Birds. Well, kind of. We don't have true birds in the Jurassic. We have avian feathered dinosaurs. Now, Archaeopteryx, like what that fossil is a picture of, that picture is a fossil of Archaeopteryx, was not a bird. It was a feathered dinosaur. There's a difference. Birds exist today. Avian dinosaurs existed back then. Our birds are descendants of them. Not really the same thing. Okay? But here's the cool thing. Feathers. That's a feather from the Jurassic. We have feathers today. And this is a very important reason for why we know birds are descended from them, because they have those feathers. What's the likelihood that any one particular trait will manifest twice in evolution? Infinitesimally small. 1 in maybe 80 trillion, okay, that the same trait will manifest twice. So, therefore, the statistical probability is that birds are descended from these guys, because it's unlikely feathers would evolve twice. Okay? That's why we believe that there were feathers on a lot of the Saurischian dinosaurs in the Cretaceous as well, like maybe Tyrannosaurus, like Velociraptor. Why? Because there are feathers on ancestral avian dinosaurs in the Jurassic, and there are feathers on birds now, which means there must have been feathers on the animals in between as well. Okay? All right, the tectonics of the Jurassic. Pangaea is breaking up. This is the end of the Jurassic. The band is getting, they're breaking up, okay? We haven't even hit, T-Rex yet, and Pangaea is not here anymore. We have our modern-day looking arrangement of continents. Laurentia has separated, And it kind of looks like what we've got now, right? What's missing? Hudson Bay. A little bit of defining characteristics on the East Coast, but for the most part, doesn't that look like North America today? Yeah. What do we have down here? There's a gigantic river system forming between South America and Africa. Why? Because there is a divergent boundary occurring there. That divergent boundary is splitting South America and Africa apart. And now a river is flowing through that Rift Valley. Look at this. India, Antarctica, and Australia are still connected to each other, but are slowly splitting apart from the southern edge of Africa and South America. We're slowly starting to see our modern arrangement of continents. Yes?
Could any of the plates like ever, so you know like whenever they collide to like make mountains,
Yeah.
could they ever like contract or do they stay together?
So you mean after a mountain range has been caused by the collision of two continents, can those continents ever split apart and remove that mountain range?
Well, not necessarily remove it since like it'll be like already built, but yeah, could that ever happen? Or will it just continue?
No, not at the pace at which this happens. What does happen is convection cells will cause a collision. That collision will happen. You'll get your mountain range. The convection cells will stop because it all has to do with the distribution of heat in the mantle. Then that mountain range will kind of just like slowly break down, weathering down over time. And then another convection cell can happen, which is going in opposite directions, and you can split that land apart. That's exactly what happens to make these supercontinents, right? Convection is causing them all to run into each other, making convergent boundaries, making all those mountain ranges. Before, when Pangaea was formed, you get mountain ranges at all the places where they sutured together. Now it's splitting them apart. Some along the same orientations that they existed when they ran into each other. So mountain ranges, where maybe there was a mountain range, like right here, it got split in half when that divergent plate boundary formed, okay? The forces of convection creating drag on the bottom of the crust is extremely powerful. Goes extremely slow, but extremely powerful, okay? Okay, so during the end of the Jurassic, there's a lot of heat, which is causing sea levels to rise. And when that happens, we get this massive inland sea form in the middle of North America. Right now, it's called the Sundance Sea, but we're going to have a different name for it as it grows and then eventually decreases in size during the Cretaceous. The Nevadan orogeny is Cordilleran, okay? So the Nevadan orogeny was a mountain range that happened because of accretion on the west coast of North America, so pushing this way, as North America is separating away from Pangaea, okay? There's stuff accreting on this, and by the way, it has never stopped, okay? This process of accretion on the west coast there from the Pacific Ocean is still ongoing, okay? So, but this Nevadan orogeny pushed all this stuff over here, which thrust material out into the central United States. So the accretion on the west coast pushed stuff out into the middle of North America here. All of the sediment washing off of that off of this mountain range, weathering and eroding off the mountain range, goes out here into the Sundance Sea, which I just mentioned was right here in the middle of North America. That sediment deposited and became what is known as the Morrison Formation. The Morrison Formation has given almost more fossils to us here than any other formation. It is filled with fossils. Why? Because a ton of sediment was washing off the mountain range and into that sea. And because it was a shallow sea, a ton of stuff lived around it or in it. Okay? So all the stuff that was living around that died in or on it or whose bodies got washed out into that shallow sea by rivers or floods got deposited in that layer, which became the Morrison Formation. I have dug turtles, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, fish. I've dug so many things out of the Morrison Formation. It's fantastic to go fossil hunting in. Transitioning from the late Jurassic to the Cretaceous, we had what is called the Zuni Cretonic sequence. So again, remember, we have all of that melted ice because we're at that transition between the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. There was a heat wave. Okay, sea levels rose. As sea levels rose, it flooded inland. Okay, so this is where our Morrison Formation is being deposited. And all of this goes from being called the Sundance Sea to being called the Cretaceous Interior Seaway. Okay, so this is going to be called the Cretaceous Interior Seaway here in a little bit. North America is split in half by this. So here's our Nevadan orogeny that's made all of these mountains through all that accretion. All that sediment is being weathered out here into the sea, making our Morrison Formation, and a bunch of the other formations that are going to come later and are also very fossil rich. All right, moving to the Cretaceous. 145 to 66 million years ago. The oceans in the Cretaceous, because of how hot, the Cretaceous was pretty warm for pretty much its entire duration. Very warm. Warmer than you and I would find comfortable almost anywhere on this planet. Okay? Especially the equatorial regions. Because of the conditions, the plant life in the oceans thrived. Our planktons really took off. There has never been a more plankton-rich or microscopic organism-rich phase in the ocean as far as we know through the fossil record. Okay, there's a lot of diatoms, coccolithophores. Coccolithophores are really cool because we have very thick deposits of those that make chalk. This whole cliffside here, these are the White Cliffs in England. This entire cliffside is made out of chalk. And that's not even all of it. Most of it has been removed due to surface conditions. But imagine how many coccolithophores had to be living in the ocean to fall down to the bottom and get compressed into that much chalk. That's how rich the ocean was with life during the Cretaceous. Okay? Now, that's the bottom of your food chain. If the bottom of your food chain is doing great, the rest of your food chain is doing pretty great too, right? We get a whole lot of fossils out of Cretaceous rock. All right. Talking about that fossil food chain, that ocean food chain, our ammonoids and belemnoids are extremely successful. As a matter of fact, they are not just prey, they are predators. They have gotten so big that they will go and hunt down a lot of the other things living in the ocean. But at the same token, they are still part of the food chain. They are not apex predators. They're hanging it out about middle of the food chain. But they've gotten big enough that they can start hunting a lot of the things that used to hunt them. Teleost fish show up to, as part of our ray fin fish. They have diversified into what we call teleost fish. Okay? So things like that movable upper jaw, symmetrical fin placement, all of that we identify with our modern fish today. That's what defines a teleost fish. And then our swimming reptiles have once again changed a little bit. Our plesiosaurs are still around, the long-necked ones. But now we have a new player on the field, mosasaurs. Mosasaurs are things like the Jurassic World movie, the first one. Did you guys see that with Chris Pratt when they first built the Jurassic World Park, right? You remember there's that scene where that big animal comes up out of the pool and eats the great white shark? That's a mosasaur. Again, not a dinosaur, swimming reptile. Okay? It's a pretty good representation of a mosasaur. Those are the big predator in the oceans. Okay? They could get extremely big. 60 feet, some of them. Okay? I've seen some of their skeletons. They are very, very impressive skeletons. Okay? Turtles got very big as well. There were some turtles. Let's see. What's the largest turtle? I think the largest turtle fossil that I have heard of is 12 feet long. Okay? Pretty good time for turtles as well. This is a mosasaur, by the way, about to chow down on a cephalopod of some kind. Looks like a straight-shelled ammonoid, maybe. All right. This was a big turnaround in the oceans for invertebrates. Okay? From the moment that brachiopods showed up on the scene, they were dominant. But at that Jurassic Cretaceous transition, something shifted. Brachiopods were not able to bounce back as quickly as they had to previously. But you know what did? The bivalves. So from this point forward, bivalves take that front position. Brachiopods we still have in the oceans today, but bivalves far outnumber them. Okay. So one particular bivalve was a type of clam called a rudist. Okay. I call it a clam. It's just, think of it as kind of like a clam. It's a type of mollusk, similar to a clam. Okay. This is what rudist colonies would look like. They grow these shells, and then they would catch food out of the water. But here's the thing. Because of the ways that these shells grow, rudists were able to live in colonies. Like what you see here. This is a rudist colony, which means that they were able to make their own sort of reef systems. This is that one exception I told you about, where from the beginning of the Triassic onward, corals dominated reef systems. During the Cretaceous, there were reefs made entirely out of rudists. They are a fantastic index fossil because they show up at the beginning of the Cretaceous and they die at the end. If you find rudists, you're looking at Cretaceous rock. Okay? All right. Then there's another new innovation for how you would hunt down your prey that can't run away, basically. Okay? So if you are a starfish and you're trying to chase down a shelled animal, or if you're a snail, you're trying to chase down a crab, not a crab, like a bivalve or a brachiopod. It's just stuck in place. How do you get through the shell? You got to pierce it. You got to poke it. Drill through it. I think I mentioned this in a previous lecture that was coming up as an adaptation. Okay, not just crushing, breaking. Yeah, you would drill down through it and slurp out the yummy insides. Crabs, though, do show up during this time. Remember, crabs are crustaceans. Crustaceans are arthropods. Okay, so while some arthropods went on land to become insects, others stayed in or near the water and became the crustaceans. Plants, okay. Now we have another really big innovation in plants. What was the last big thing that happened for plants that let them succeed wildly? Yeah, not the ferns, but the seeds, right? Seeds were huge. They allowed plants to start growing further and further from water to survive desiccating environments better, okay? Well, now we see the next big change in plant populations, the development of a particular type of plant called an angiosperm. Angiosperms are ones that they're flowering plants and they have an enclosed seed. So for example, fruiting plants, apples, oranges, etc. What advantage could this possibly give? Okay. This is part of a process called double fertilization. An angiosperm doesn't just have a seed that it drops to the ground and grows into a new plant. It fertilizes a seed, or I should say its seed gets fertilized, right, by pollen, and then there is another seed that gets fertilized and starts growing tissues on top of the first one. Okay? So your apple tree doesn't drop apple seeds to the ground, it drops apples. Apple, the actual apple itself, is the tissue grown around to protect the seeds on the middle. Double fertilization. Essentially, when you're eating an apple, you're eating a tree egg. Interesting to think of it like that, huh? Chowing down on ovarian tissue. Yes, odd. Also, the same thing is true when you eat a mushroom, by the way, if you want to think of it like that. Okay, now, the advantage that this gives is the double fertilization provides not only protection for the seeds that will go on to become the next generation of plants, it also gives a burst of nutrition. So that apple falls to the ground, it's protected, but then the apple slowly starts to decay into the soil. As it decays into the soil and it releases all of its stuff into the soil, the seeds inside of it can start growing out of it and root itself in that soil that has that burst of nutrition from the apple itself. Okay? That's the advantage of having a fruit around your seed. Your seed will grow faster. So for a gymnosperm, from dropping to the ground and growing is about an 18-month process. For an angiosperm, it's 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah. That initial burst of nutrition from the fruit is massive. We also see an interesting intersection here between plant evolution and insect evolution. Why would that correspond to the development of angiosperms? Ideas? How would insects help fertilize the angiosperms? Okay. There's a mechanism that we need to identify for how that happens, though. How do insects going tree to tree help pollinate these things? There needs to be something that draws them from tree to tree. What food? It's not the fruit. There is something that is always associated with the fruit. Flowers. Flowers. Okay? What is a flower? Flower petals are essentially specialized leaves, right? Flower tissue is essentially leaf tissue that has been sidetracked for a different purpose. Evolution has selected that tissue because it is fulfilling a function. What is that function? At some point, a long time ago, there was a random mutation that caused an angiosperm plant to grow a particular different color of leaf. Okay? That particular color was one that some flying insects nearby were able to see, and it drew them to that particular plant more than it did the rest. Since that plant saw more activity from flying insects, its pollen was carried further, more often, further afield. And that took that mutation with it. Maybe it was a yellow leaves. Maybe it had green and yellow. Maybe it was red. But the insects carried it further, and so that mutation spread over generations. And as every successive mutation that had a color change that would draw certain insects to it occurred, that particular species of tree would become more or less successful than the ones around it. And so now we have a world filled with all of these wide variety of flower colors because of the preference of the insects that spread the pollen. To this day, we will see that bees will prefer one color over another. Same thing with certain flies. And now that there are animals that have evolved to specifically target that, there are some species of spiders that will only live in the flowers of a specific tree because they know that their preferred insect of choice for prey will only go to those tree flowers. It's fascinating to see how two totally different groups, insects and trees, have affected each other's evolution over time. Truly, all tied together. Okay. Our Cretaceous dinosaurs, while there are not as many, how do I say this? There is not a species that ever got bigger than the titanosaurs that we saw in the Jurassic. There are lots of big dinosaurs, okay? There are still some sauropods, at least towards the beginning of the Cretaceous. Tyrannosaurus rex, which is arguably the largest body mass size predatory dinosaur that ever lived. There's an argument that Giganotosaurus had a larger head. There's an argument that Spinosaurus had a larger surface area because of its sail. But Tyrannosaurus rex probably, when it was full grown, had the largest amount of mass. Okay, that's why we still kind of treat it as the king of dinosaurs. Although people like to argue about that. Okay. The ecosystem, the dinosaur ecosystem, behaved, it would seem, very similarly to what we see in the African fauna today, where you have different niches occupied by similar-looking organisms. So, for example, our wildebeest, which is kind of our middle-of-the-road size herbivorous prey, would have been occupied by things like these guys. Your hadrosaurs, like this is Corythosaurus it has here, Lambeosaurus, Iguanodon, Parasaurolophus, all of those would have occupied the same sort of ecosystem niche as wildebeests do today. You would have guys like this, Ankylosaurus, Eupliocephalus, big, armored. They would probably occupy the same sort of niche as your rhinoceroses do today, okay? Generally solitary or small groups, capable of defending themselves, etc. Then you have your small pack hunters, things like dromaeosaurs, your velociraptors, kind of occupying the same niche as savanna dogs or hyenas, right? Then you have your big solitary predators, like lions, although they don't always hunt in solitary. Sometimes they hunt together. We're not quite sure whether or not Tyrannosaurus rex hunted solitarily or in groups. Evidence would suggest it was probably more solitarily. There's also a large contingent of people that argue that Tyrannosaurus rex was a scavenger, not a prey hunter. Don't know. I don't think it was solely a scavenger, but I don't think it would have turned up a free meal if it found something dead lying around. Now, I promised you I would talk about the big crocodiles. Here we are. During the Cretaceous, we have the biggest crocodiles that the world has ever seen, as far as we know. Suchomimus and Deinosuchus. Okay? This is Deinosuchus chowing down on a T-Rex for lunch. These were 40-foot crocodiles. Yeah. That is a Suchomimus jaw compared to the largest saltwater crocodile jaw that we have today. Jared's out. He's like, nope, absolutely not. If you ever want to watch a movie that will absolutely freak you out about crocodiles, watch Lake Placid. It's a classic crocodile horror flick. Okay. Whoop. Almost dropped it. Our flying reptiles got very big. The largest to ever exist was about the size of a small airplane, Quetzalcoatlus. Okay, 35-foot wingspan. Lived during the Cretaceous here. Now, that is so large that it probably wasn't able to take off on its own. The physics just don't quite work out for it. Being able to flap its wings, even with the size that it had, I don't know. It just doesn't quite make sense, especially considering it had this big head crest, which the function of that is up for debate as well. It was wide and flat, and a lot of people think that it may have been used as like a rudder. Turn your head, and like it'll direct where your body goes in the air, kind of similar to a ship's rudder does in the water today. But it was also at the end of a very long neck, so I'm not entirely sure if the physics of that makes sense. But the most likely scenario here is that these things lived on cliff sides, and they would jump off the cliff so that they would never have to utilize the energy to lift their bodies off the ground. Just jump and glide. Ride the air currents, catch your fish or whatever in the ocean, come back, land on your cliff again, etc. Mammals, still doing the same thing. Small, nocturnal, hanging out. Now, and this is when we start to see this differentiation between placentals and marsupials as well, by the way. So the mammals that were capable of giving birth to live young, instead of just going from the egg layers like monotremes, we now have placentals, which would give birth to mostly formed live young, like you and me, and then marsupials, which give birth to underdeveloped live young, but are arranged in a pouch. So in the order of which one we see in the fossil record, we see monotremes, and then marsupials, and then placentals. Okay. Now, the extinction at the end of the Cretaceous was caused by an asteroid that struck Earth just off of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. Okay? This is called the Chicxulub crater. This is what it looks like. So right now, half of it is underwater and half of it is on land, but buried in sediment because it's 65 million years old. Okay? This is what it looks like when you make what is called a gravity map. Okay? So this is what a picture of it looks like when you just take into account the layers of rock that were impacted. Okay? So you can clearly see it's an impact here with a cone of debris that was blasted out this way. The impact of this asteroid sent tsunamis hundreds of feet tall all the way across this coastline. There are scour marks in layers of rock from that tsunami deep inland in North America. Okay? So the tsunami probably killed a bunch of stuff. The initial impact probably killed a bunch of stuff. But Earth was hit by rocks before. What could have caused an extinction of this magnitude? Not the rock itself. There was definitely some volcanic activity that got set off by this. But what mattered more was not the rock itself, but the dust it kicked up. It put so much dust into the atmosphere that it sent the world into a winter that probably lasted at least a few years. What happens if you cover the world in clouds for a few years? It gets cold. Your plants don't get the sun they need. Your plants die. Your plankton don't get the sun they need. Your plankton dies. Both of those make the basis of our food chain on land and in the ocean. Boom, bada boom. Lose the bottom of your food chain. Extinction happens. Okay? So, what do we lose? We lost our swimming reptiles. We lost the ammonoids, finally. They all kicked the bucket. We lost pretty much all of the planktons that were living in the ocean at that time because they were photosynthesizers or consumers of the photosynthesizers. Those rudis, those clams, are dead, which is why they make for great index fossils for Cretaceous rock. Our flying reptiles and our dinosaurs, all gone. The age of the reptiles' dominance, no longer true, because they really did. They dominated the land, sea, and air for pretty much the whole Mesozoic. That's why we call it the age of reptiles. Okay. All right. So this is the late Cretaceous, right here. This is what the Earth looks like when the asteroid impacted. The asteroid impacted right there, right in what was ocean. There was no land exposed at that point in time, which is why it made the tsunami. Okay? Hits here, creates an extinction. We already have most of our modern day continents when that extinction happened. Look at this. The only thing that's different is the positioning of Eurasia here. It hasn't quite finished rotating this way. We have this giant seaway in the middle of North America still. That'll close up here in a little bit. Australia is just now kissing Antarctica goodbye. India already took off. Madagascar is starting to separate from India. Those are really the only differences. Otherwise, you can clearly see the continental arrangement, where it's going to be, what it's going to look like. Whenever we get deep oceans in warm environments, we tend to get anoxic environments as well. Okay? The anoxic, aka low in oxygen environments, prevents the degradation of all of that stacked up planktonic life matter that falls to the bottom of these deep oceans. This is going to be the source for a whole bunch of oil that we are interested in finding later. Okay? Excuse me. So that's what makes those black shales. Okay, Cretaceous and Jurassic black shales are very common oil sources around the world. Okay. All right, so here we have the severe orogeny, which is Cordilleran, West Coast. Pretty much everything we're going to be talking about here on out is going to be West Coast because from here on out, the East Coast is mostly a passive margin. Okay. So we have the severe orogeny, which continued what the Nevadan orogeny did before of shoving more and more stuff from the West Coast into the middle of North America. As it does that, as it thrusts that material up and keeps building those mountain ranges out where the Rockies are now, that sediment keeps getting washed into the Cretaceous interior seaway, starts to fill it in. And eventually what happens later in colder climates, sea level also begins to fall. So that combined action of filling in the seaway and dropping sea level reduces the seaway to nothing, making our whole, once again united, North America. No longer a seaway in the middle. And you can see that happening here. Okay? It's starting to fill in. No longer is there a strip of ocean here. We now have what is called the Maori Sea, which is eventually going to get closed up right there. Okay, and then all of the remaining water here is slowly going to evaporate away. Okay. Speaking of evaporating away and depositing material, we get a whole bunch of chalk built up here. Do you remember that picture of the White Cliffs in England that I showed you? Here it is. It's along this coastline right here. Massive, massive chalk deposits happened along here during the Cretaceous, which is really good because all that chalk doesn't let the oil out, which is why the Northern Sea out here is extremely common for offshore drilling for oil. A lot of oil comes out of the North Sea up there. Okay, it's very dangerous too. It's very stormy, but the amount of oil that they can get out of there makes it pretty worthwhile, I guess, huh? Huh? I'm sorry? How do the Great Lakes come to be? That's a good question. That's going to be something that we talk about next week when we learn about the more modern, the Cenozoic. Okay? That happened during the Cenozoic. Short story, Ice Age ice pushed the crust down. Yeah, and then when that ice melted, it left that depression which filled with water. It is currently rising. Yeah, the Great Lakes are shallowing out and spreading out as they get shallower. Yep. Yep. We call that isostatic adjustment, remember? Yep. Okay. Also, the Grand Canyon was excavated during this time. What happened during the Grand Canyon to make the Grand Canyon was as a result of not as a result of, this was the force behind the Nevadan and severe orogeny, was the collision of a small plate with North America that got shoved under North America by the Pacific plate behind it. Okay? This poor little plate got stuck between North America and the Pacific plate. It was called the Farallon plate. It got pushed down under the North American plate, right? But, and this is hypothetical, we don't know this for sure, but this would explain why the Grand Canyon formed. Because remember, canyons only form where rivers cut through highlands. It's pretty low-lying, pretty level area in this area of the Grand Canyon, except for one area called the Colorado Plateau, which got uplifted by something underneath of it. That's why the Grand Canyon exists. The Colorado River cut through that one area of plateau. What we think happened was the Farallon plate got shoved under North America by the Pacific plate, detached, and then kind of floated up underneath of North American plate. And as it came up underneath of it, it pushed a section of the North American plate upward, creating the Colorado Plateau, which made the Colorado River drill down through it to try and reach sea level again. And that's what made the Grand Canyon. Okay? That happened during this time. Okay. Any questions about the Mesozoic? No? Alrighty. So let me give you a really quick reminder of what's left. Okay? You have both your lab exam and your final exam to take. I'm going to open both of them after lecture on Monday, and you will have until the end of the day, like midnight on Thursday, to complete them. Okay? I think those are the only two remaining unassigned things in the class.
What's the lab exam going to be?
The lab exam is very different from the lab exam that you took in 1403. There's like no identification on this one. It's pretty much just fill in the blanks. Okay? I'm going to ask you things about like put this particular time on the geologic time scale, right? Where do all the times go? All the periods, eons, things like that. What cratonic sequences and orogenies did we talk about? And what order do they occur in? That's why I pointed them out to you early on, right? Things like that. Any other questions? Cool. Then I'm going to end the recording here.